Amen. Good morning. Well, if you've looked at your calendars, then you know that it's almost August. It is just around the corner, and that means a couple of things here at Waypoint. That means that we will start, first of all, into a month focused on family. And so just as a reminder, there won't be children's church for the month of August, but we'll have some activities right here in the middle of the service for the kids. Yes, there will still be nursery for the littlest ones, but we're looking forward to having the kids join us. Also, you might remember that there's this little meeting coming up next week. On August 3rd, right after this service, we will go downstairs and we'll take a few minutes, have a hot dog or two, and then after we've visited for a little bit, we'll come upstairs and we will talk a little bit about what is next for us as a church. And if you're worried about your kids, we've got something planned for them at the same time as well. Also, you just as something to look forward to, let me just say this: just be prepared, to stay for an hour or two next Sunday afternoon, and we'll see what God says to us in the midst of it. I realize as we prepare for that, as we think about what is next for us as a church, I realize that it's not something that we have to do. We really could just leave things alone. We could just coast along. We could just go from one Sunday to the next, probably even enjoy ourselves and have a good time along the way. We could not attempt to do anything. We could just, relax and just take things as they come and just kind of stay in our own comfort zones and, just let things happen as they will and not worry about it. Here's the problem with that, is that when you begin to realize that God intended so much more for us, when you begin to realize that God intended for us to live life filled to the brim with excitement, when you begin to realize that God intended for us to be constantly moving forward, constantly doing and seeing things that He is doing all around us, to live lives full of passion, it becomes very hard, at least it is for me, to realize or to accept, to just do things as they always were, just to do the same things over and over and over again. It becomes impossible, I think, when you get a taste of that, to just accept the status quo. You see, when I think about that and think about why is it that so many churches, so many of those of us who would call ourselves believers, why is it that we accept that? Why is it that we sometimes are just content with the status quo? Now, as I've thought through that and kind of processed through a little bit, I don't think that it's because we don't want to see God do something amazing in our day. Is that not true? I mean, don't we want to see God do some amazing things in our day? I don't think it's even because we love the way things are. I'm not sure that we are so sold out on doing things the same over and over again that we don't want to move forward. I think, though, underneath it all, I think that far too many of us stay where we are because we have never truly learned to trust Jesus. I think that's the problem. I think underneath, that's the issue. And because we have never truly learned to trust Jesus, we are frightened. We are afraid of what is out there. We are afraid of where He might take us. We are afraid of what it might cost us. And that fear ends up holding us back from seeing what God might do. I know it is really easy for us to say, trust Jesus, right? It's really easy for us to say that I trust Jesus. I mean, after all, it only took us, a few days before we had an entire group of kids, yelling out, "Trust Jesus" on cue, right? And I saw a lot of the adults doing exactly the same thing. It's easy to do that. It's even easy to say when you're sitting around in a Bible study talking about a hypothetical situation, it's easy to say, well, just trust Jesus, right? But it's a whole different story when you are faced with uncertainty. It's a whole different story when your life is filled with confusion and you're not exactly sure what is next. And I mean, if one thing is true in our day today, it's certainly that, isn't it? I mean, our world is filled with uncertainty. Our world is filled with confusion. We talked about that several weeks ago, didn't we? About how there's so many voices out there, so many voices out there that would give us conflicting, ideas. They would all call it the truth, and all would want us to follow their voice. It becomes hard. In the 11th verse of the 10th chapter of the Gospel of John, Jesus says this. He says, "I am the good shepherd." And in those words, he says far more than just a declaration of his divinity. As is the case when, throughout those great "I am" statements of our Bibles. He is declaring more than that. He is declaring more than just his style of leadership. This Gospel of John in chapter 10 is more than just a treatise on what he believes and what he would have us, follow as, a leadership model. What he's saying to us is that I am the one who can be trusted. I am the good shepherd. Remember, like sheep that are gathered around a shepherd, he is the one that can be trusted in all of life's circumstances. And that means everything. That means when life is going well, when things just seem to be sailing along, doing good, that means in the middle of that, he can be trusted. That means that when you're afraid of what's around the corner, when you're afraid of what is next, when you are afraid of just anything, he can be trusted. She agrees with me. And when you are in need, when you are in need of something, in those circumstances, he can be trusted as well. And even when you're not sure of what lies ahead, even when you're not sure of what is right around the corner, in those circumstances, he can be trusted as well. And so as we begin to examine this idea of what's next for us as a church, I would argue that the most important thing that we can do, the most important thing that we need to understand, not just today and not just leading up to next week as we begin to unpack what's next, but really throughout the rest of our lives, the most important thing for us to understand is that he can be trusted. It's not just a statement that we teach kids. It's not just a declaration that we make when we're sitting in a Bible study class. It's more than that. I'm oftentimes drawn to the book of Acts, and oftentimes I'm reminded that at the very opening of that book of Acts, Jesus sent a handful of followers out into the world to do the impossible, to do what they could not do on their own, to do far more, really, than they could have ever imagined, that they could have ever even dreamed was possible for them to do. Why did they go? They went not because they knew where they were going, because a lot of times as you read through, the book of Acts, you realize they didn't know what was just around the corner. They went not because they had it all figured out. They didn't have a whole set of, a booklet to follow, where they knew exactly what was going to happen. No. They went not because they had all the resources that they needed. They went because they trusted the one who sent them. They went because they trusted Jesus. Turn with me, if you want to follow along, in John chapter 10. And let's walk through a little bit more of this great passage. In verse 11, he says this, "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for his sheep." Now, we need to stop there because, really, we don't need to go any further than that. I mean, we could just stop right there. What greater reason could there possibly be to trust Jesus with whatever He might say to us, with wherever He might call us, wherever He might send us, whatever He wants to do in our lives, than to realize and to remember that He died for you? I mean, is there anything greater than that? I mean, when we talk about this or think about this just in terms of leadership and what that means for leadership as we look at Jesus, well, we could say pretty easily then that He was all in, don't you think? Right? I mean, he was invested. He was invested to the point where He laid down His own life for you and I. So if you are wondering this morning whether Jesus can be trusted with your problems, if you are wondering this morning whether Jesus can be trusted with the challenges that you are facing, if you are wondering this morning whether He can be trusted with your difficulties, you really don't need to look past this. Because the one who would give His life for you and me can be trusted not just with our eternity, but with today, with the whole of our lives, problems and all. So before we get any further, before we dive any further into this, let me ask you this. Have you trusted Jesus with your eternity? Have you trusted Him with your life? Have you accepted His forgiveness for your sin and begun to live that abundant life that we spoke of last week that Jesus pointed towards? If not, then I'm okay if you ignore me for just a little while. Bow your head and get that right now. There's no need to wait. Because you will never learn to trust Jesus with the rest of your life until you have begun that journey with Him. Until you have entered into that relationship with Him, just as the sheep have with the shepherd, by following Him as both your Lord and your Savior. So let me read that again. I am, He says, the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But a hireling, he is who is not the shepherd, but a hireling, he is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he's a hireling and does not care about the sheep. Now, there's so much that we could draw out of this passage. But context, remember we've talked a little bit about that over these last months. Context demands that we understand and highlight the fact that Jesus' words here in chapter 10 come as a comparison between Himself and the spiritual leaders of the day. This really is a passage about leadership. It's a passage specifically about Jesus' leadership as the Good Shepherd. So specifically what He's doing is He is calling out the leaders who continue to badger Him. And they badgered Him all through the Gospels, right? They were always trying to find a way to trip Him up, always trying to find a way to make Him look bad. But they were the ones who were misguided in their authority. They were leading people astray. They were more interested in their own profits than they were concerned about the welfare of those that they were to guide and to care for. Where Jesus, the Good Shepherd, lays down His life for the sheep, they're in it, it seems, just for the money and the political power. Remember what happens, what a shepherd is supposed to do? You remember that from the beginning of that a couple of weeks ago when we first introduced John chapter 10? The shepherd's number one priority was to watch out for the sheep, even to the point of putting himself between them and danger. And you remember that picture? It's an amazing picture of the shepherd who would lay across, and become literally the door to the pen, to the sheepfold. And he would lay across that opening of the pen, saying to any predator, anyone who would come and do damage or harm to the sheep, that they must go through him first. That's an amazing picture. But too many leaders in Jesus' day, spiritual leaders, they were more interested in their own welfare than they were of that of the sheep that were under their care. So context demands that we highlight not only what Jesus reveals about himself in this passage, and we've done a little bit of that, but also what he says to those who would lead and follow after him as well. See, Jesus' example should be what the spiritual leaders of the day, it should be what they do. It should be what they sought after. And it should be the same even today. Because his example stands as a model for those of us who would lead even today. But Jesus was doing a couple of things here. And I think throughout this passage he does this. Maybe a better way to understand it would be this. Jesus is speaking on two different levels. And he does this quite often, quite frequently. First, he gives us a glimpse into who he is, right? He is the good shepherd. He is the I am. But he also, he's the ultimate example of a shepherd. And the shepherd, really on a level that no earthly pastor, no earthly leader could ever achieve. So he gives us that. And yet at the same time, he leaves behind for us a model, an example of what a shepherd, what a spiritual leader, what a pastor ought to do and ought to look like. You see, to his followers, he is helping them understand who he is. To the spiritual leaders, he is holding out for them what it is that they should have been, what they should have been focused on, what they should have been doing, what their attitude should have been. You remember we began John chapter 10 by highlighting how we ought to follow his voice. Remember? And then we followed that up last week by talking about how Jesus, offers those who would follow him not just life, but abundant life. And today, we continue in John chapter 10 by seeing, I think the next step to that of how the kind of atmosphere that those who follow him would and should find themselves in. In other words, what kind of atmosphere should there be inside of that sheepfold? Remember, I think we said a few weeks ago that John Maxwell, the leadership guru of our day, he said this: as the leader goes, so goes the people. The sheep take their cue from the shepherd. There's no question. If the shepherd is afraid, then the rest of the sheep are going to be afraid as well. You see, or we could say it this way: the shepherd, the leader, is the one who sets the tone and the atmosphere. And so the question becomes this: what is the tone? What is the atmosphere that Jesus is trying to set? What is this atmosphere that he intends for us to live in? What are the kinds of things that create this kind of atmosphere? Well, you see, I believe that atmosphere is one of abundant life. That is what he intends. That is what all of this is supposed to point to. That is what all of this is supposed to produce. So let's run through a little bit of this, and it goes beyond the few verses that I read, but really encompasses the whole of chapter 10. But first of all, we know this: he leads the sheep, right? That's pretty clear. It's pretty plain. Now, he doesn't drive them. He doesn't stand behind with a whip. He doesn't stand behind with a cattle prod. No, he is out in front leading them. And he's being, we could say, what he intends for us to do and to be. So it implies, first of all, that they are going somewhere, doesn't it? Just the act of leadership, the idea of leadership means that you are going somewhere. So we could say this: if you aren't going somewhere, then it's not leadership, it is management. And I think too many of our churches today have fallen into management rather than leadership. And I think that is a problem both on the leadership side as well as on the congregation side. There's blame to be passed around, in case you're wondering. But we're aiming not for management, because what is management's number one goal? It's to keep the status quo. What is the goal of leadership? It is to lead people to where they wouldn't go without leadership. It's almost in stark opposite to one another. Anyways, we could spend a lot of time there. Secondly, not only does he lead, but he knows the sheep. He knows the sheep. And Adam's going to dig into some of this next week. But simply put, he's not very far off. He's right there. He walks close enough to know the sheep. That means he walks close enough to us so that he knows us. It's no mistake the example that he leaves behind, is it? Jesus walked the closest with a dozen men, right? And within that small group of people, he walked even closer with a smaller handful of those. You see, he knew them and knew them well. The third thing is that he feeds the sheep. I mean, over and over, we find these words or a statement, something like this in the Gospels. And it doesn't matter which Gospel you look at. It says something like this, and he sat down and began to teach them. Have you heard those words before? I mean, in some way, shape, or form, that is what Jesus does over and over again. He is constantly teaching them. He's constantly, as he walks, he's telling them stories. As he goes along, he points and uses illustrations. I mean, over and over again, we could give examples of how he does this. Everywhere he goes and all that he does, he's teaching in the process. The fourth thing that he does is that he guards the sheep. I mean, that's a kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? That's what a shepherd does. That is the priority of his life. But his disciples, Jesus' disciples, they didn't need to worry about anything as long as they were walking with him. In fact, they didn't need to worry about anything even when they were walking without him when he sent them. Do you remember that? I mean, we have the example when he sent out the 70, and then, of course, we have the entire book of Acts. They didn't lack for anything. Don't mistake that for they had easy lives. Those are not the same things. The fifth thing that he does is that he seeks the sheep. And this we could dive into and kind of explore, and spend, weeks diving into this. But I think nothing is clearer than Jesus' own words when he says, "I have come to seek and to save that which is lost." That's the heart of Jesus. That's what he did. He is seeking those sheep who are not yet in the fold. And each of these things, we could mine and we could spend all of our time, talking about any one of those. But what I want to highlight for us and just explore a little is the kind of culture, the kind of community, the kind of atmosphere that would reflect this abundant life that he speaks of. And how does that relate to the leadership principles that are there? In some ways, I'm preaching to me, right? Because I'm the one who's standing here. I'm the one who carries the title. But the implications are, they're vast. And they cover each and every one of us, not just spiritual leaders. You see, I believe that these specific leadership principles lead to specific behaviors among the followers, among the sheep. And these behaviors create the kind of life that Jesus points to, abundant life. It creates culture, creates atmosphere. In other words, we could say it like this, that abundant life is found under these circumstances and within this kind of atmosphere. And this atmosphere is an atmosphere that really begins and ends with safety, right? Because it is within and underneath the fold of the Good Shepherd. But it begins, I would say, with an atmosphere of trust. You see, it's the kind of atmosphere of trust, of leadership that goes forward, not because I said so, but because you have grown to trust me and believe that I am seeking to follow the great shepherd. Does that make sense? Now, sadly, like all other leaders besides the example that we see before us, I have and will make mistakes. I could give you a list of them. But in an atmosphere of trust, we will be quick to give the benefit of the doubt. In fact, that's where we will start and offer the same grace that all of us need at times. And so I hope you will do that with me. Give me the benefit of the doubt, because there are, well, as I said, there are times when I make the wrong choice, just as all of us do. But there's a couple of things that rise out of this that I think are worth noting. Things that kind of go beyond the standard, lessons that are drawn out of this. Two things that come from how I see Jesus leading. First of all, I would say this: you cannot lead someone to a place you have never been. We get that? You can't lead someone to a place you have never been. Now that has implications not only for a leader, but for every single one of us. Because if you are trying to, lead one of your friends to Jesus, if you are trying to, lead your family, you can't do that if you are not walking in step with Christ. The second thing is this: I believe that as a leader, you should never ask others to do something that you are not willing to do yourself. And I think we see both of those principles rise out of Jesus' ministry. And that is why I do a lot of the things that I do. That's why I work as many hours as I do. That's why I give as much as we do. This is why we pour our hearts into this as we do. And it's why when I leave here, on any given day, I don't leave the burden behind when I go home. It comes with me. And these things lead past an atmosphere of trust to an atmosphere of care. An atmosphere of care where you know that the shepherd is watching out. Now, I'm fully aware, and maybe this is an odd thing to kind of inject in here, but I'm fully aware that I have the tendency to kind of take my emotions and kind of put them behind a wall. Part of that is my culture. Part of that is my personality. Part of that is out of necessity. And I'm also aware that for those who don't really know me beyond this on Sunday morning, too often you see the passion and the drive, not the burden and the stress. But I'll tell you this, for the first time in my life, I have a group of men who I meet with every single week where I am able to share some of those burdens. And it has made a world of difference. And it's that desire that I have for every single one of us. That's why we talk so much about a small group. That's why we talk so much about getting involved and doing life with other people. You see, this atmosphere of care is not developed in a room like this. It's just not. The dynamics are not, that's not what it's for. But only when we gather side by side, we get across each other and a small group of people around a table and, a cup of coffee, and we share our lives together. You see, that's where we process what God is saying to us. That's where we share with others, and we not only do they carry our burdens, but we carry their burdens. And so, as we lead up to the fall, it's going to be here in a heartbeat. Be planning now for what small group you will be a part of. Be planning now to set aside a little bit of time that you will invest in others and let others invest in you. If we go kind of beyond that, in this atmosphere of trust, in this atmosphere of care, it also kind of goes hand in hand with that is an atmosphere of discipleship. And it is far more than imparting information. It is an expectation of growth and an intentional process of following. It is learning to be disciples, following Jesus. I mean, if we are supposed to go, I heard that somewhere before, right? We are to go and make disciples. But you can't lead somebody where you have never been. And I think that's part of the problem that we have, again, in so many of our modern churches, is that we are trying to make disciples when we have never been one. We don't even know what that looks like. Because we have equated discipleship with a little bit of information instead of being actively doing. I could get sidetracked on that. I'll try not to. It's why we are creating an intentional and comprehensive process of discipleship here at Waypoint. And you know, the context of that is a small group of people. You see, we do those things together. We do those things side by side. And all of this creates and is added to an atmosphere of safety. Because the shepherd's job is to protect those who are under his care. It is spiritual, it is practical, it is physical, it is theological, all of those things. And so following Jesus' example, we are trying to create, first of all, a feeling, of safety. And what does that mean? Well, that means that there is an atmosphere of openness and dialogue. That means that anyone is welcome to come and ask, of me, anything you want. There's a reason why, more often than not, if you were to come by here during the week, my office door is open. That's intentional. And many times, some of you even have come and asked me a question, clarification. You know what happens when you don't do that? You make an assumption in your mind and you start telling yourself a whole story of what has taken place, and pretty soon you are angry for no reason. When all it takes is just a clarification. Come and ask me. But it's not just me. My goal is to create an environment, and we are seeing that in, where every one of our leaders is both approachable and available. And so as much as possible, it's my intention to meet with anybody who wants to sit down, and I'll clarify whatever it is that we need to. You see, that's the kind of thing that creates a feeling, I think, of safety, where it's okay to ask questions. Some of the best questions I've gotten have actually come from some of our young people. But it goes beyond that. It goes beyond to the physical protection of each one who walks in these doors. This is why we have security in place. This is why we have cameras in our rooms. If you haven't noticed that, surprise, there are cameras in all the rooms. There are cameras even in our offices. This is why we have a security check-in for our children. This is why we have security doors to protect them. And so, yes, I understand that sometimes it's frustrating, especially if you've been in this church for years and years and years, and you just want to go to that room. They're locked for a reason. They're locked intentionally. And there are still other things that we need to do, that we will do in order to make things as safe as we possibly can. Anyways, we won't spend all of our time on that. The last piece, I think, is probably the most neglected of all the things that we do as far as church, as far as leadership, as far as an atmosphere. And it is an atmosphere of outreach, an atmosphere of reaching beyond, an atmosphere of seeking to save the lost. Because if that was Jesus' number one priority, then shouldn't it be ours? How can we call ourselves his followers? How can we call ourselves, his people? If that one thing, if the thing that is the closest to his heart, if we don't do that. Next week, and I'll give you a little bit of a preview maybe. Next week, I'm going to lay before us the boldest outreach effort that our church has ever attempted. And any church that I've ever been a part of has ever attempted. And the boldest ask that a pastor can ever make. Because I'm not looking for a handful of volunteers. What I'm going to ask is that every single one of us be a part of this. Because we can't do it alone. Our staff, we don't have a hope of pulling this off. We need all of us. All of us. And all of these things are possible because of the atmosphere within the fold that the Good Shepherd provides. You see, because he can be trusted. We can go down this path. We can head down this path. We can begin to do these things. And I fully realize, I look at this list of characteristics, and you know what I see right off the bat? I see where I am lacking at every one of those. I get it. You don't need to tell me. I understand. But I also know where we are striving to go and what we are striving to become. And within that atmosphere, if we ever learn to trust him, he will take us to places that we can't imagine. He will use us in ways that we never thought possible. You see, when you have this kind of atmosphere among God's people, and let's not talk about this in broad, generic terms, when you have this kind of a culture in our church, well, abundant life is not something you dream about. Abundant life is not something you seek after. Abundant life is something you experience. Because you watch the hand and the movement of God right in our midst. So tell me, how abundant is your life? And don't you want a little bit more? Don't you want to get up in the morning? Maybe a better way to say this, don't you want to put your head down at night and know that you have sought after the very purpose that the God of the universe has for you? And you've done it together. Maybe you need to begin that journey of abundant life today. Maybe you need to rearrange the priorities of your life so that you too can experience abundant life. Whatever it is that you need to do, do it. Don't put it off. And can you set aside a few minutes between now and next week and just ask God, would you set my heart at a place where I will trust you no matter what? Where I will trust you for whatever you have in store for me. Where I will trust you for what you will set in front of us as a church. And imagine what he will do with us in the process. I hope and pray that every single one of us has that kind of a desire. To see him use us. To see him do things in our lives. That as God said to the prophet, you would not believe even if it were told to you. So I don't know where you are this morning. I don't know what challenges you're facing. I don't know what life has thrown at you. But can you take a few minutes? And can we corporately bow our heads together and ask God to draw us so close to him that we will trust him no matter what. In spite of it all, it doesn't mean it'll be easy. In fact, I will tell you that once we begin to move forward, life's going to get harder. I'm sorry, that's the pattern that we see in here. There will be more opportunities for dissension. There will be more opportunities for problems. There will be more opportunities, to be at each other's throats. I'm just being honest. Because anytime you step out and you begin to follow Jesus in a manner that will change the world around us, we all of a sudden show up on the enemy's radar. And the only way we will survive it, the only way we will thrive in the midst of it, is if we stand together. Stand with me, will you? Father, as we bow before you,